Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome along everyone. I've had a few projects and especially one recently where I was picking up a reasonable amount of vibration, and for ages now I've been wanting to make a steady rest, so this project is all about making a steady rest. Now I've just really put a spindle in here just to give an example of how I'm planning to do the layout. I've watched several videos on YouTube, I've used those as a guide for what I want to do. Now I've got a set of rollerblade wheels that I picked up. I've had these for probably about 3 months now. They are brand new, they came from China I believe. Just to give an idea of what I'm looking at, I've got an oversized disc here which is just going to act as sort of like what will be the inner ring of what I want to make. Now it will probably be slightly bigger than what this is, and the reason for that is that the swing on my lathe is around about 370mm, which is just under 15 inches. So I want to make sure that I try and keep as much of that as possible. And what a lot of other people probably haven't picked up on is that the moment you put these on your guides, the slot that you have, for example, if that's attached to the piece of wood like that, what a lot of people haven't really picked up on is that when you then put your slot in the piece of wood here to run on the actual outer ring, you're already in a good portion, and therefore you're actually reducing what the maximum stretch of these are. Now hopefully these markings will show up on the camera. I've just drawn the 120 degrees there, so I can just show as an example there. If this is, so the wheel is coming at the top here, this one is going to come out the back here, so that means that my arm is coming down there and it's going to soon catch the table. This one, no problem at the front, and obviously you've got all the clearance at the top. But by rotating this around a little bit down to there, I can now have it so that this arm comes down here, this arm comes at the back, still slightly down at an angle, and this one will then be coming up towards me. For the construction of this, I've got this sheet of MDF here I bought last month. It's 18mm thick, 1220mm high and 606 wide, so it should be plenty for what I need. Now and again, because to save as much of the swing as possible, I need to get my ring fairly big. And I've just got an example here of a piece of wood there that's probably what, an inch and a half. I would look at having something like that as my base to go on the bed where the lathe, and then some form of a mechanism so it slots in place in here and it can't twist around. What I intend to do is when I bring this ring round, I want it to do it so it joins on the edge here, and there will also be pieces under here which then go over the side of the bed waist. So again, it incorporates extra strength so that this can't move side to side, so that everything's not just on this little piece in the middle. The first thing I need to do is cut my disc, and I'm unsure about the inner size yet. As I said, I would ideally like to make that at the least 185mm, so that it would effectively bottom out where the lathe bed is, and I may make that even slightly bigger. But the first thing I'm going to do is do it so that I cut my outer ring, and that's going to probably be around about 250mm. Now this is also going to be a test for the oldie palm router I bought, because it does have a circle cutting jig. I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to cut the outer circle with that or just the inner circle, but I shall certainly use it to cut the inner circle. The outer circle I might cut on my bandsaw with my circle cutting jig. Now I've cut my two boards, they're about 520mm wide that way, and I've just left them at the width of the sheet, 606. Now I need to do a circle on here at about 500mm, so I will have a portion of this that doesn't get used, and rather than just slice it all off, I've just left it on. Now I have joined these together with double-sided tape, and that is just cheap double-sided tape, so hopefully it's going to be enough for this to keep together, but should easily come apart. Now I was going to use the oldie rotor to cut the initial circle on this using the Circle Cutting Jig, but this has a limit of 221mm for the radius, so therefore I can't use this for the outer circle because I want 250mm. But I'm going to give it a go for the inner circle, but I'm going to have to use the Circle Cutting Jig I made on the bandsaw, and I've got my pin there ready for this, so I'm going to drill a 3mm hole on the centre here, so it will mount on that point, and then I can cut the circle out. That's now cut on the bandsaw, and you can see I've got a fair bit left over there. Ended up with a nice perfect circle. One slight bit there, which is probably where the entry point was, so I'll just sand that down, but the rest looks pretty good. Next job will be to cut the inner circle bit. Now for this, as I said, I'm going to use this oldie palm rotor. Never used it before for this way. So the screw is in there, just enough to keep it in place. The other thing I'm also going to do as well is I'm going to use the bit that came with the rotor, just to see what it's like. And I will slowly start off by going down a few mil at a time. When I get towards the bottom, then I will just prop this all up on some bits of wood, so that I can then eventually puncture through the whole thing. Now I've got to say the rotor handled pretty well. I did have a couple of minor issues. One was that this was far too loose, so I had to tighten that up, because what I found was that the rotor was just dropping down via gravity. All in all, it's cut fairly well. I just need a bit of minor sanding up on the inside there. I do have a little chunk at the bottom here. Now that isn't so much a problem, because effectively if I put the centre of this circle with the central line of the lathe, I'm going to have about a 10mm gap here. Now the way my lathe bed is on here is that I will then probably cut this on the sides here, so that this drops down to the side of the lathe, and I will then fix this to some pieces of wood, which will then take on that bit over the lathe. Now I've just been using some of the offcuts from these bits to cut out a couple of blocks here. Now I've got one block here which is, I've just took down on the table saw as well, so it's 16mm thick, and it's actually the same thickness as my bedways here, so that it will sit flush on the top and flush on the bottom, which means that if I put something else through there to lock onto the bedways, it should have a nice reasonable tight fit. Worst case scenario, I just need to probably just sand this down a bit just to make it a little bit thinner. And at the same time, I'm going to then have a block like this fixed to this, which will be the main base. So here is that level part with the bedways, and this block will effectively go in there. And I'm looking at having a couple of pieces of more MDF here so that they come down the sides of the bedways. Off camera, I've just finished making this cradle. Now that's the piece of MDF that I cut, which fits into this gap nice and snug. I have sanded it down a bit so that now the thickness of this is thinner than the thickness of the lathe bed here. So at least when I do get something through there to hold it in place, it's going to have a secure grip from underneath. I've done a couple of sides here. The angles are cut so that they meet the profile of the lathe. The sides and this piece have all been glued on, as well as just held in place with screws, and that is now a really nice tight fit in there. Absolutely no play whatsoever. For the main ring, what I've done, I've cut this to where I want this to fit, so it's going to fit about there. And what I'm going to have to do is, once I've finished cutting all this outside ring, for attaching this onto here, I will screw it from the inside, glue it as well, and I will then probably put some form of a extra support arm across the top here to just make sure it pulls it into place. So my next job is to mark out where I want my arms on here. I will then make sure that this top piece is screwed onto the bottom, so that when I do take it off and it's been cut and everything, that when I put it back on, it's fully aligned. Even though it's just the cheap sort of carpet tape I've used on this, it's going to be an absolute nightmare to pull this apart, because even this bit that I've pulled out of here is held so well, you physically can't just pull it apart very easily. So I'm going to probably have to get a chisel or something in between these to start with, to start pulling them apart. So once I've got all the arms cut out, then the remaining pieces I can then screw back on, but I should also glue them as well, so that there's full strength there. Now what I've done here while I was off camera is, first of all, I screwed this outer ring onto the back ring, and that was just so that when, after I'd cut all these slots out, it would just go back in exactly the same position. I started cutting these on the bandsaw blade snapped, so I've ended up cutting them on the scroll saw, and I've got to say, scroll saw cutting 18mm MDF is absolutely brilliant. Nice, quick, and you get, I think, a lot better cut than with the bandsaw. So I cut out the 3 slots, and you can now see here the angles that I'm going at. This back one is still slightly tilted down, but it should go down towards sort of my tools at the back there, which is why I couldn't have it no further down. And then the top one will be coming out at an angle like that, and the bottom one will be at the bottom at the front here, which is no problem, because I mean normally it would be out here, so it's just further down. Once I've got all those cut, I then glued these back on, screwed them in place, glue has all gone off, just sanded all down the edges, and I could then at that point then attach it to the base here. Now for attaching this on here, all I've done is I've drilled 2 holes through each half, and that's just to really help hold it in place, glued on. Now because really everything is on these pieces, I didn't think there was just going to be enough support, so if these get pulled at all, it's just going to pull these legs out. So what I've done on there is I've just used an offcut from when I cut the original disc out and created this little brace on here. So it's glued to the top plate, and on each side it's glued to the actual ring, so that at least the ring can't pull outwards or push inwards. so it will go against this main base plate. Now this side, you can see that this side I actually come round it on this side, whereas this side I've cut off an angle there, and the reason being there is that because that's where I've got the slot for the arm, and I just didn't want anything interfering in there. I mean, I could have come out a lot bigger, but this way I will have just the same bolts through every one. Also at the same time, I've drilled some 8mm holes through the base here. Just use ordinary bolts here to go right the way through, and I cut myself a couple of pieces of oak, so they're narrow enough that way just to drop through the bedways, but they're wide enough that way to then grab underneath. So they just line those up in there, drop it in place, wing nuts to tighten it up, and that is now really secure. So my next job is to cut these arms. Now all the arms are going to be that width, probably be a bit of a better snug fit in there. I just use this as a guide for when marking out all these slots. They are all exactly the same, so they've all got a slight bit of play in there, but I will cut the arms for each one. Once I've got the arms cut, I can then route out a centre slot so that they'll slide up and down a bolt that goes through here, and then finally fix the wheel on the end. I'm going to make each arm about 300mm long, which would effectively take it beyond centre, so at least it's going to be when it's around about centre, it's still going to have a bit out here so that everything's not tipping down on one side. Now that's the steady rest complete. You can see there, got 3 arms all at 120 degrees each, and as I said, my problem here was my bench on the back here, which is why the back arm here is slightly up higher, because then it's got plenty of room to travel out. As you can see, it's not going to catch on anything. Had I got this one up at the very top and rotated this one down further, there's a good chance that this would have been catching the bench. And with this one at the front here, there's no problems with where that's going to be. So I have routed out a groove all the way through these, just around about 6mm. I've used 6mm bolts on all of these. I've used a large washer with a spring washer and a wing nut on these. The only downfall on these at the moment is that because the bolt slips on the other side, it's not a problem, because it's not like I'm going to be using this every day all the time. I just need to hold it in place at the moment with a spanner just to tighten these up. It is really secure. There is, I mean, if you try and swing it from the top, you do get a little bit of flex in it, but at the same time the lathe is rocking. But down here, halfway down, there is absolutely nothing there whatsoever, and I can basically move the lathe. So it is rock solid on here. And I think, as you can see here now, it's because I've designed this so that the actual ring comes down below the side of the lathe bed, it's actually given me more space inside here. Now I've done this at the moment so that the wheels are on the inside of these arms, so therefore there is a limit to how far that you can pull them out, because the wheels will obviously catch there. But on that basis, it still gives me quite a reach. Those are now set at their size there, and I suspect that's going to give me probably around about 150mm to the centre. So it does give me a working piece of about 300mm, even though the swing on my lathe is probably about 60mm, just over an inch, maybe 2 inches bigger. So I haven't lost too much, but at the same time I've also got to think that I've lost probably 40-50mm on the bottom here for this base plate. And this does, as you can see, work really well. Quick and easy to do with the thumb screws. Again, I've put the little spring washers on there. It helps keep it in place, takes out any vibrations. so that hopefully it won't come apart. And it really is a case of just swinging them around and the whole piece pops straight out. And once you've got it in place, there's lots of clearance on there, so it goes right over the top of the braces. So you can see here for the other side, because these are actually only screwed and glued onto these side parts, I needed to strengthen up a bit, because it would have probably been possible to pull these out and it would have caused some form of movement on here. So that's why I then just cut this extra brace, which just holds those in. And again, they're glued and screwed in place, so they're screwed from each side, also screwed down onto the base plate here, so it will just cut out any more movement. For the actual wheels, what I've done here is, again, very similar. Bolt one of these large washers behind the bolt on the other side, through the MDF, another large washer on the inside, then it's got the full wheel assembly. I've then just put a spring washer on here and a locking nut just to keep it in place. So just to prove how stable this is, I've just got a spindle here, which was, I think, an offcut from a curtain pole, and it's about 350-400 mil long, so it's about 12-15 inches long. I've only just basically tightened it up in the jaws on this end, so it's only just really there to grip it, to drive it. I've lined these up so that it was central. I did bring up the tailstock first of all to make sure this is fully central, to then bring the wheels in. And as you can see there, they are all just about catching nicely. And I'm just going to show here with the skew and spindle gauge. So where I had a very uneven surface to start with, skew chisel has just brought that up nicely. And then if I just lower the tool rest a little bit, and that is certainly work I just couldn't have done without this. Yes, if I could have brought up the tailstock, but there's going to be pieces where you can't bring up tailstock support and where the steady rest is going to be fine. Now, of course, the other thing you can't do without the steady rest is work on the end of a spindle at this sort of length. So I've just moved this back to where I trued it up with the skew just a moment ago, just so I've got a bit of space there. I can now bring up the tool rest here, and hopefully this should be running fairly central. I haven't checked it, but I'm not too bothered. And it's now being supported by all three wheels, and hopefully without a catch. And as you can see there, I can hollow out the end. So that's where a steady rest is going to come in handy. So as you can see there, the steady rest works fairly well. This spindle just held in the jaws there by what, 10mm, and had the steady rest towards the end. The cove is almost perfect, no problems with that whatsoever, and then when I moved to the end, hollowed out the end fine. When I bought the MDF, I also bought some primer because I was planning on painting it, because at least just to help protect it, because MDF really does not like moisture. And I think, as you can see from the array of colours I've got on my shelf above my head, I thought I'd have a go at doing something. And as you can see there, yes, I have gone fairly bright. I've gone for black for all the framework, the arms this neon red. Now, if you've watched all the other steady rest videos on YouTube, there are several out there. They all work on the basis of a complete ring, and you can see, hopefully by where I've just altered this a little bit by doing it so that the ring is slightly larger, but it goes into the base plate, that it does allow you a bit more room here. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next project video.